Good morning. My name is Sandy Wolfwood, a member of the Westminster Social Justice Ministry Team. We build the social justice forums around a common theme, and this program year, the theme is moving from understanding to transformation, affecting change together, guided by God. Through these forums, we want to explore capabilities we need to build and norms we need to examine in order to be effective transformation partners in our community. This morning, we are pleased to welcome Katie Dillon, Director of Align Minneapolis, formerly Downtown Congregations to End Homelessness. Katie is a member at Plymouth Congregational Church. Following a career in product design, Katie earned a master's degree in social work with an emphasis on families and children. She joined Align Minneapolis in 2021. Katie will provide updates on the Emergency Rental Assistance Program, a proposed Minnesota constitutional amendment for housing, and her work supporting Street Voices for Change and street songs, as well as opportunities to get involved supporting Align's mission. Before we get started, just a couple of items. For those attending in person in the Meisel Room, raise your hand, and we'll bring a microphone to you so everyone on the live stream as well can hear your question and comment. For those attending on the live stream, please submit your comment or question in the live stream chat, and we'll monitor that and raise your question or comment. As part of our ongoing effort to promote respectful conversations around concerns in our community, the Social Justice Team has established guidelines for the social justice forums that you will see on the screen. You'll have to take a minute to review those when we put those up. Before we get started, a short prayer. Let us pray. Holy One, God of justice, breathe into us today a spirit of curiosity and humility. Help us engage with mindfulness, following the lead of voices from our community. Guide our speech and our self-awareness so we may honor the divine in all people. Amen. So now, please welcome Katie to today's forum.
Great. Thank you so much. What a pleasure to be with you all. This is actually one of the really fun parts about my job. It's getting into congregations to be able to talk with people, share about our work, and really hear from folks out in the community. What are you thinking about? What questions do you have? Particularly around the topic of homelessness. There's just a lot that goes along with that. And so I hope that, I'll give a little presentation. Obviously, I want you to understand the work that we're doing, but would love to, be able to spend a lot of time on Q&A to hear from you all and have some conversation. All right, so it was mentioned that Align Minneapolis is formerly Downtown Congregations to End Homelessness. Our goal is to address homelessness together. And the way that we do that is really in coalition. This group began in 2008, and it came out of the downtown clergy and a lot of the conversations that they were having as a group around the topic of homelessness, housing injustice, and realizing that there was so much work being done, but that it wasn't necessarily being done in a coordinated way, and there was an opportunity to kind of come together to be doing that work. And so the formerly Downtown Congregations to End Homelessness was formed. And we are now an interfaith coalition of 18 member congregations. We, in fact, just had our 18th member congregation join this week, so we're really excited about that. And we are also, along with people with lived experiences of homelessness, as part of our network and as part of our coalition. We really take what we see as a multi-pronged approach to addressing homelessness. So on one hand, we have people who are experiencing real need and real instability right now, and we need to work to meet immediate needs. And we'll talk a lot about the ways that we do that as an organization, and then also within our member congregation, some of that work is being done. And then on the other prong, we're really looking at what are the systemic things and kind of bigger picture things that we can do to resolve some of the underlying conditions that contribute to homelessness and housing insecurity. And then we are a very tiny organization ourselves. We are 1.5 staff people, but the power that we have is through our network of congregations, of course, and also we participate in other coalitions. So, for example, there's a state coalition that is focused on state legislative advocacy and moving state legislation to really change some of the housing, some of the world around housing. So I mentioned that we are a coalition that includes people with lived experiences of homelessness. So this is really a foundational value that we hold as an organization, is that we cannot do this work without the people with lived experiences of homelessness who are, impacted by this issue day in and day out. So one of the ways that we do this is that we support a group called Street Voices of Change. Street Voices of Change is a group of people with lived experiences of homelessness, sometimes formerly homeless, sometimes currently homeless. They come together twice a week and they have meetings where they discuss kind of conditions that they're facing, resources that people can access, and then they also work for some of that deep systemic change. And so there's a lot of power that happens in these groups and in these meetings. We have a total of about 75 to 100 people that participate every week, kind of coming in and out, just depending on what's going on in their lives. But it's really an empowering group. And, we often hear from folks that they might feel like invisible, or they're not seen or not heard. But one of the things about coming into these Street Voices is that people really have a voice. So the groups determine issues that they want to work on. They do, organizing. There's organizing training that's offered to people so that people really understand how to make change. The group also has so much expertise and so much knowledge about navigating the systems and what's working, what's not. They actually are able to provide that expertise back to some of the people that are, kind of in power in the system. So this might look like, the Hennepin County case management team coming and getting some feedback about how are things going with that. Or recently, the Department of Justice came and talked with the groups about the consent decree that is being developed for the Minneapolis Police Department, because we know, unfortunately, that folks experiencing homelessness often experience quite a lot of kind of extra criminalization and pressure from the justice system. In 2023, we had a huge win at the legislative session. The group had been really focused on what's called housing support reform. It's a program that was formerly called GRH, or group residential housing. And the reform was to make this program affordable for residents that were utilizing it. Previously, it had taken sometimes 80-90% of a person's income was going to housing costs. But the reform at the legislative session is that now it will be 30% of a person's income. And so really making that program more affordable. And that way also more people can then access that program. So really exciting win at the legislature. This is just a highlight of an award that was recently presented to Street Voices of Change and Align. This was the Northern Lights Organizing Award at the Minnesota Coalition for the Homeless Conference, recognizing the leadership and the ongoing commitment to working for change that the group does. So very exciting to be recognized for that. All right, so a little bit more about Align and kind of how we're structured. So we have a steering committee, kind of like our board of directors. Your very own Elena sits on that steering committee, and in fact, she chairs that. She's an amazing leader in that space. And then we also have an organizing team that's really focused on congregational organizing. So the people that are part of that team are generally, just members of some of our member congregations, and they're kind of that conduit into their own congregations to work within their congregations to do education and bring people to action and, do advocacy work. And so it looks different in every congregation. And some congregations are represented on that team, some are not. But that group is just a great group that is working to get information about this topic out into their congregations. That group also oversees, we publish 3 guides per year, and that those guides are meant to be for our congregations to focus on a specific aspect of homelessness and do some of that education work and some of that action work. And so we're finishing up the season of our fall guide, and our winter guide will be coming out very soon, which is exciting. And that group also oversees, we have a monthly electronic newsletter. If you're ever interested in receiving that, I have a sign-up sheet in the back. You can just put your email in there and I'll get you signed up for that. And those monthly newsletters just provide all sorts of things, updates about upcoming events related to housing, updates about our programs, updates about legislative advocacy, and other things that Street Voices of Change might want to lift up. They recently had done a little series around how to be an ally to folks experiencing homelessness. And then we also have a team that's called our Direct Service Providers team. This group is made up of staff that are and clergy that are part of direct service congregations that are part of our network. So congregations that are themselves providing resources to meet people's immediate needs. And that group works on coordinating, make sure that there's things that people need, make sure that those needs are being met, but also that there's not too much overlap so that we're not duplicating services. And that group also oversees our emergency rental assistance program, which I'll get into a little bit more. And then we have our Street Song Choir as well that is overseen by that direct service program. All right. This is just a picture of our Homeless Day on the Hill 2023. So it's actually not even the full group that is pictured, but we have, folks from congregations, folks from Street Voices of Change, and Homeless Day on the Hill. If you're not familiar, it's a legislative advocacy day focused on homelessness at the Capitol. And then in this upcoming year, it'll be March 20th. So if you're interested in participating, mark your calendars for that. All right, so I mentioned our emergency rental assistance program. This is one of our signature programs that really is something that we are incredibly proud of, that we feel like makes a huge difference in the community. So when we talk about homelessness, there's all sorts of different things that we can do to address homelessness. And one of those key pieces of that is addressing homelessness prevention. So preventing homelessness from happening in the first place. It's actually one of the easiest and most effective ways to address homelessness. How do we do that? So oftentimes when folks are, let's say, lower income or, as part of a marginalized community or have experienced all sorts of different trauma in their life, they can really kind of be on a thin margin when it comes to the income that they make and the rent that they're paying. And so if a crisis arises, so, maybe there's an emergency car repair. They need their car to get to work, but their car needs a $400 repair, otherwise it won't run. But they don't necessarily have the money to cover that and also pay rent. Or maybe somebody was out of work for a couple of weeks. Either they were between jobs or they were sick or they were caring for a sick family member. So they lost 2 weeks of income, didn't have enough paid leave or sick time. And so, that might be the difference between them being able to make rent or not. And so this program that we have is really meant to step in what we call a short term, so less than 3 months, kind of acute crisis. So a crisis happens, but it can be resolved. And then during that time, somebody might get behind on their rent. So our people can apply to our program, and if they are approved and they meet our qualifications, we then pay all of their back due rent and late fees to get them completely caught up so that they're in a position where moving forward they are now stable. And part of our program requirements is that, they can pay their rent ongoing going forward. There's a huge need in this for the community, not surprisingly. And there are programs that are like state programs and local programs, but the need really, really vastly surpasses the amount of help that's out there. So we are, in relative terms, a really small program, but yet we do feel like our impact really does add up. So far in 2023, we've already helped over 100 households stabilize and get caught up on their rent. We've provided over $155,000 in direct assistance. So that assistance goes directly to the landlord or property manager to clear out that balance. And the average assistance is about $1,500 per household. So not a vast sum of money for each individual household, but you can see that it really, really does make a difference. All right, and then the other program that I mentioned that came out of our direct service providers group is our Street Song Choir, which is an amazing choir. It's just started in the fall. We started our 10th season of our choir. And this choir is open to all, very welcoming. Folks don't have to have any previous experience of singing in a choir. And really, our main goal is to create community through music. We know that there is a healing power in music, and we also know that folks who have experienced homelessness may not have always had the opportunity to explore what that might mean for them and what that healing power might do for them. So this group is made up of people with lived experiences of homelessness, as well as people in the community that maybe are connected with the topic of homelessness. Maybe they volunteer with an organization that is connected with homelessness. And so, the group might change each week. There are people who will come in and come out, but there is a core group of singers that really are bringing this choir forward. We welcome 2 really incredible new co-directors this year to the choir, and they're doing an amazing job of, finding music that speaks to kind of that power of song and, bringing out kind of the justice aspect and also making it a lot of fun. And then when we're out in the community, really we hope to kind of bring that inspiration and hope out into the community and kind of, get people excited about working for justice. All right, so I'm going to just give a little bit of context around homelessness, just in addition to the things that we do at Align, just to kind of ground everybody and kind of what's going on in the community. So a lot of us know that, with inflation and everything like that, there's just been rising costs, right? And so folks who are lower income or medium income, they just don't have a lot left over at the end of the day. And so you couple that with also rising rent, and people are really stretched thin. Luckily, rents have not been rising as drastically in our metro area as other communities across the country, but they are rising. We have a lot of what's called cost-burdened renters in our city and our state. So the definition of cost burden means that people are paying too much of their income to housing. So the rule of thumb is that you want to be paying about 30% of your income to housing costs, and anything beyond that is considered cost burdened. So not only do we have cost burden renters, we also have a significant portion of people who are what's called extremely cost burdened, which means they're actually paying more than 50% of their income to rent. And just anecdotally, folks that are accessing our emergency rental assistance program, it is very rare that we see somebody who's paying less than 50% of their income to rent. It's just the reality of rents these days. Unfortunately, as well, seniors are our largest growing segment of people experiencing homelessness. So I think, we can all imagine that ultimately it comes down to math. And when folks are retired and they have fixed income, but their rents continue to rise, there are times when that's just, the math does not work out. Sometimes this might mean that folks will return to work after retirement. We have often seen that. But unfortunately, we know that there is a big increase in homelessness for seniors. We also have a historic level of evictions in our community. So folks that are being taken to housing court due to, having back due rent, and then oftentimes will come out of housing court not able to pay that back due rent and will actually end up being evicted and lose their housing. Coming out of the eviction moratorium from the height of the COVID pandemic, evictions skyrocketed, which unfortunately wasn't particularly surprising. We kind of expected that to happen, but not only that, they've really remained at historic levels. And so there's a lot of pressure there. We also know that shelters are mostly full and sometimes even at overflow. So the single adult shelters in our community are usually at, 96 to 97% of capacity. Our family shelters right now are actually at 359% of capacity. So what this means, we have a shelter all policy in Hennepin County for families with minor children. So families are guaranteed shelter if they have minor children, but the shelters are full, they're at capacity, so the county is actually putting folks up in hotels, which is on one hand great that folks have a roof over their head. However, they're not able to access a lot of those supportive services that they can get in shelter that can help them kind of get stable and get to that next step. And so it's a really, really tough situation right now for everyone, and particularly in families. And the other thing that we know is that we don't have enough housing units, just across the board, across the state. We don't have enough of all different types of housing units. And then that basically puts a lot of pressure on the system. And that's one of the reasons for the rising costs and the rising rents. And especially we have a gap in housing units for homes that are affordable to lower income Minnesotans. All right, so we kind of set that tone of kind of what the context is. And so then we talk about, all right, so what do we do? So bottom line, we need investment. We need investment across the continuum. And when we say continuum, it's really everything from preventing homelessness from occurring all the way to building more housing units. And in that spectrum, we're talking about making sure that folks have emergency shelter. We're making sure that folks have a variety of different types of housing options. Some people might need a transitional setting where they can access more services. Some people might be okay to just be, having their own apartment and be ready to go with that. Some folks might need a setting that's more community-based and smaller and has a little bit more of a sense of family and connection. And some folks might be fine in just kind of a general apartment, type of unit. But we really know that we need a lot of different types of housing and investment across the continuum. One of the things that is in the works right now from a legislative standpoint is something called a constitutional amendment for housing. And some of you might remember the legacy amendment that was put in place within the last, I'd say probably like decade or 12 years. That was a small percentage of a sales tax, then that money is dedicated to arts and cultural heritage, right? So this type of constitutional amendment has a very similar structure. It would be 3/8 of 1% of a sales tax that would be dedicated revenue to housing across a continuum. The estimate is that it would be about $450 million in revenue every year that would be dedicated to 3 different kind of buckets of use. So that would include things like home ownership opportunities. It would include support for renters. And then it would also include kind of community supports. And those buckets of funding would be overseen by councils of folks that are in the community that have experiences of, utilizing these types of programs. So really the kind of general underlying goal of this is we know that as a state, we have significantly underinvested in housing. And what that and that also it has sometimes been at the whim of who's in control of the legislature. And so that has led to a lot of the problems that we're seeing today. So the goal of this constitutional amendment for housing is that we would have a more stable and robust level of investment. So we would be able to resolve some of the things that have come out of the underinvestment. That work in terms of where it is in the legislative process, it is going to be proposed as legislation this upcoming legislative session. If it passes at the legislature, it would go on to the ballot for the general election in fall of 2024. And it would be so everybody who votes on anything in office for the 2024 election, anybody who votes would need to vote on that constitutional amendment, and it would need a majority yes votes. If somebody didn't vote yes or no, it would be counted as a no vote. So just structurally, that's kind of the arc of how that would look. And I mentioned, of course, the lack of housing, and so investment in actually building more housing and maintaining current housing is truly needed. So this might look like state infrastructure bonds. It might look like City of Minneapolis Affordable Housing Trust Fund money. Really, anybody who's developing those affordable housing units, they're going to be utilizing a lot of different sources of money to be able to build those. The other thing that, of course, we want to do both as Align and as a lot of our member congregation is really connecting and building relationships with our unhoused and housing insecure neighbors. And that can look like a lot of different things, but at the end of the day, we want to be in relationship with folks so that we know that the work that we're doing is meaningful and making the appropriate change that's going to impact them in a positive way. And then the last point that I always include, and folks who hear me talk probably get sick of hearing me say this, but this is the kind of work that no one person can do on their own, no one congregation can do on its own, and it really takes all of us working together to, make this big change that is needed. All right, so I think we're going to move into Q&A, and I will just leave this slide up for a moment so people, it sounds like, just familiarize yourself with the kind of the commitments that you all have made during Q&A. And I think Sandy has the mic, and we will just move into that.
Thank you so much for being here. This
Yes.
is interesting and something that I want to get more involved in. I already subscribed to your newsletter.
Yay, thank you.
I read something recently, I don't think it was in your newsletter, about this opportunity to make a contribution to a fund at the state that results in an 85% tax credit. Can you tell
Yes.
me anything more about that? Is that a good idea for me to do?
I have also heard about that, and to be honest with you, I don't know. It's something that I would like to learn more about. But my basic understanding is that you as an individual can essentially opt in, and that it unlocks money for housing, and then it comes, I think, back to the person in the form of a tax relief during, when you file your taxes. But I don't know a ton about it. And so that's a good reminder to learn more. And I appreciate you bringing it up. Yeah.
Thank you for your talk. How do folks know about Align and how do they connect with you?
Great question. So I think a lot of folks that know about Align and are connected with us are from our member congregation. So they might hear about us within their congregation. I might be coming to do a talk at their congregation, or maybe something goes out in their communications or their newsletter within their congregation. So that is one of the key ways that folks find out about us. But we also have folks who, sign up for our newsletter that are maybe just, concerned citizens, or people that just have, that naturally want to know more about the issue of homelessness. So they might do a web search, or they might come across us on our social media. We also sometimes will get folks who are part of the service provider community who find out about us. So maybe they're a case manager at Simpson Housing, and they might just want to be connected into the work that we're doing. So they'll either connect with us through our website or subscribe to our newsletter. But I would say there's a variety of ways. But probably the core part of it is folks that are in our member congregations.
I actually meant the people who need your services.
Oh, thank you for clarifying that. Yeah, that is also a variety of ways. So folks find out about our emergency rental assistance program often from searching online. They will sometimes find out about our emergency rental assistance program through their landlord or property manager, or through a friend a friend or family member that has accessed our program. There are times when they might be calling the Tenant Resource Center, which is sort of a centralized resource for connecting people with programs, and they might find out about us that way. Our Street Song Choir, folks find out about us we put flyers up in the community where folks already are. So places like the library or Peace House or some of our direct service provider congregations. And we also have our Street Voices of Change group also developed, they have like a resource one-pager that they developed. We'll put those types of materials up as well in the community. And so really we're trying to let folks know about our programs and about our member congregations direct service by meeting people where they are in the community. So just, posting up flyers and where people already are.
Elena just told me that people can walk in off the street and come to our front desk, and they're prepared to talk to them about it.
Yeah, absolutely. We hear that a lot as well. Yeah, through our member congregations, folks walking in the door and asking the question about, do you know where I can get help with, an ID or socks or, so absolutely.
I had a question about the constitutional amendment. That's really compelling. And I wondered if there is precedent anywhere else in the nation for something like this and how it's working.
Yes. Yeah. So I believe, yes, Colorado has something similar that they just put into place. I don't know kind of how that has been going so far because it is so new. I think they're the only state that has done something quite, that is structured in a similar way. It's interesting though too, because there are things that are part of what would be the constitutional amendment for housing, like vouchers to make housing affordable for anybody who needs it, that have been happening in small ways through a metro sales tax. And so those are kind of in the works here, but in a much smaller way. I'm hoping that that can be almost like case study, right? To say like, yes, this is working, or maybe it's not, or what might need to change. But I don't, it's a good reminder to hear, or to try to find out more about how it's going in Colorado, because I do know that they recently, I think just this past year, they recently passed something.
What I like about that is extending the responsibility for this problem to everybody in the state. I was
Right.
thinking a little bit about, and I'll ask this question too, about where you get all of your funds, but in a way, the constitutional amendment acknowledges that everybody is our neighbor. So I like that.
Yeah, thanks. I agree. And I think, a lot of legislators have talked about how, we have a commitment to, funding things like education and roads and bridges, at a certain level, and that housing just has not had that consistent investment, and that like it should, because everybody needs housing, right? Yeah. And then do you want me to address your question about the funding? Okay, yeah. So, and so I think generally the question is probably how does our organization get our funding? So primarily our source of funding is through our member congregations. So member congregations will pledge to contribute to the ongoing operations of our organization, as well as specifically for the Emergency Assistance Fund. In fact, that is the vast majority of our budget, is the emergency assistance or emergency rental assistance fund that goes out in direct assistance. Now, luckily, some of our member congregations have legacy gifts that they are able to contribute to that are meant to be directly, helping with that. And so that fund is able to be, supported regularly and ongoing. We do get individual donors, everything from, smaller, more modest amounts to, significant contributions. Not necessarily like always consistent, but we do, of course, we welcome and appreciate those gifts that are given at every level. So there's a small portion of our budget that is funded that way, but the vast majority of it is funded by the member congregations. We also have accessed at times small grants to support different parts of our work. In fact, Street Voices of Change just recently was granted a gift from the self-development of people through the Presbytery here to support some of their work that they are doing. And so we'll sometimes get small grants for that type of thing that are smaller, not the big operational grants. But yeah, that's kind of the gamut of our funding.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions. One, I'll ask first because it kind of springs from the question that Sandy just asked. I was thinking about the member congregations and knowing that this program originated downtown, but clearly homelessness extends, and the experience of homelessness extends beyond the metro area. So I wondered a little about how congregational membership development works, and whether there's outreach to congregations that don't happen to be right downtown.
Yeah, great question. So, and I guess I should have explained as well the change in our name. So I mentioned that we started as Downtown Congregations to End Homelessness. Our organization changed its name back in, I believe it was 2018, because we had really grown beyond that downtown core. And so wanted to encompass, be a little bit more inclusive of across Minneapolis. So we changed our name to Align Minneapolis. So the way that, congregations maybe, if they're considering joining our organization, or if we see that they might have, some alignment of values and commitments, generally a lot of times that's, me working and talking with a pastor or, other person, another, staff or clergy person at the congregation, and just helping them to understand what we do and, kind of where our values are. And then, they might go through an internal process of discerning if it makes sense for them to join the coalition. At this point, we have really just been in Minneapolis, and we kind of extend as far out as, I think our farthest out congregation is probably 31st in Chicago, so not even that far out in Minneapolis. But there may come a time when we want to be beyond just the Minneapolis core. But I think right now, we sometimes will actively be, working to connect with the congregation and start that conversation. Sometimes the congregation will approach us to start that conversation. And and sometimes it just happens organically. Sometimes it's, one of our steering committee members or one of our member congregations talking to, one of their colleagues at a different congregation and saying, oh, it sounds like the work that you're doing is really in alignment with this organization. So it kind of happens in a variety of ways.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
And then we have a question from the live stream. This is another policy question.
Yeah.
So it might be that you're going to say we should all look on the internet about this.
No worries.
But this has to do with the court suspending the Minneapolis 2024 plan and reverting to the 2030 plan, and an inquiry about,
Yeah.
there's some zoning changes associated with that. So just
Yeah.
wondering how that's going, if you have knowledge about how that's going to affect the larger issue of access to affordable housing.
Yeah, thanks for that question. And I actually, to be frank, I don't know the latest and greatest in terms of that court battle, because I know that it has been working its way through the courts. But essentially, so my understanding is the 2040 plan that was put into place essentially upzoned all of Minneapolis to say that you don't, there's not a restriction to have only single-family homes anywhere in our city. And so sometimes when you're driving around the city, you might notice that something that was previously a single-family home might have been torn down and maybe a fourplex is going up there, or a duplex or something like that. So it sort of blanket across the city, upzoned everything to essentially allow for densification, more housing units in the same physical environment. So there's a local coalition called Make Homes Happen that was actually working on kind of an accountability piece to say, how is Minneapolis doing on its commitment to things like density and, commitment to affordable housing and things like that. That work has kind of paused because of this legal challenge to the 2040 plan. So I think the legal challenge right now, I think, has made it so that it doesn't have to upzone everything. I believe that's the case. But I think what's interesting is that there was sort of this momentum happening. And so I believe that there will be continued momentum, even if the law is not such that, you can or can't do it. It's more that it's allowed and people are probably going to do it anyway. And there's even some unique things that are happening, like people are able to put something called an ADU, additional dwelling unit, on their property. And that, I think, was explicitly allowed. I think it was related to the 2040 plan. I could be wrong, but that's still allowed, right? And so it's like, okay, if these things are possible and we're seeing them work, I'm hoping that the backtrack on the 2040 plan won't make a significant negative impact to that, but maybe that should be just me being hopeful. So I think, we'll see how it plays out. I think the fact of the matter is, we know that we have a need for more housing units, and, we need to continue to kind of raise that as congregations and as citizens. And so however that looks, we'll see. Yeah, thanks.
I have another one.
Yeah.
I would just love to hear about your own professional background and how you came into this work
Yeah.
and what inspires you and keeps you going.
Oh, goodness. Okay, great question. Yeah, so my career trajectory was sort of a little bit of a winding road. I moved to Minneapolis actually to work for Target Corporation in product design and development. I did that work for 7 years, and then I was in the environmental sustainability team there as well for a couple of years. And then I had my son, who is now 9, and I decided to stay home with him for a couple of years. That felt like that was the right thing to do for me and for him. And I was taking care of some other friends' kids as well, just to kind of make ends meet. But I sort of took that time and admittedly was doing a lot of walking because my son was not a great sleeper. So to get him to nap and to get his little friends in daycare to nap, we just walked. We just walked and walked and walked. And so it gave me time to reflect on what do I want to do as my next stage in my career. I have always had a big commitment to kind of my faith grounding, and a lot of that has looked like social justice work, and has, in my church growing up and my membership at Plymouth Congregational, a lot of that has been, how do I put my faith into action, and how do I put the things that I believe in into trying to make that happen in the world. And so after a lot of walking and a lot of time home with my son, I decided to go back to school to get my master's degree in social work. And I sort of had an aha moment, like when I first started. I said, oh, I feel like maybe I should have done this a while ago, but okay, like I'm here now. And so got my master's degree in social work. And during my time in school, I was actually working for part-time for what is now Agate Human Services, used to be St. Stephen's Human Services. And in fact, I was working on a homelessness prevention program there. And so I've always had a little bit of like a, kind of like somewhat of a connection with or care and concern for the topic of homelessness. I lived, when I first moved here, and for the first number of years that I lived here, I lived in Stevens Square neighborhood, where there's just, a real mix of different types of housing. But, folks who are sometimes really marginalized and really struggled. I also feel like, as somebody who grew up in a very privileged household, and I have a sibling who has gone through a lot of difficulty, and had we not been part of a really privileged household, I think there's a very real possibility that my sibling could have experienced homelessness or some other type of really intense trauma. But we had that kind of natural safety net with our family, and not everybody has that. So all these things were sort of forming. And then after I was done with my social work degree, I worked for the county for a couple of years. And then when the director position at Align came open, I was just thrilled to think of that as a possibility, because I thought it was really a way that I could marry my sort of moral and faith grounding with some of the things that I really cared about in the community, and that it was focused here in Minneapolis, in a city that I love and have a lot of commitment to. So I think it's been a pretty good fit, thankfully. It also is the kind of job where I'm doing a lot of different stuff on any given day, which is kind of nice for me, because, I get to learn new things. I get to, talk with all sorts of different folks. I'm here with you all today. I was at, Plymouth Congregational last week. I'll be, I sit with Street Voices during their meetings twice a week. And so I really, it kind of gets that people part of it. And then I think too, like, working on issues that are really kind of those long-term, bigger picture things, I feel like is really important kind of for that long-term arc towards justice. So yeah, thanks for the question.
So I want to take you back to Street Voices for Change, and I'll
Yeah.
kind of backtrack and say, we talked a little bit of, both of us are designers, and I had a same sort of aha moment and went back to the Humphrey in particular to understand how design thinking can affect policymaking. And what you were talking about with Street Voices for Change is a key factor of design thinking, which is bringing the people most affected by a problem into crafting a solution with you.
Yes.
And so I want you to talk a little bit about that and that experience, because that's fairly radical in this world of let's solve your problem for you.
Right. No, absolutely. And I think that's something that has been unique to our organization over many years, but more and more organizations are recognizing the value of folks who are impacted by the work that is being done need to be part of that conversation. And I love to think about a world where it's not unusual and radical, right, to include those voices. But I think, so day in and day out, the things that folks are experiencing, I myself, as a staff person, and many of our members of our congregations and of our network are not experiencing those things. Most of us are fairly privileged. Most of us are stably housed, and that doesn't mean all, but many of us. And so to be able to hear on a regular basis that kind of grounding in the true human experience is just, it's truly transformational. I loved when you were doing your intro, you were talking about transformative work, transformation. It really is transformational, because I think it takes what can be a very data, numbers driven type of work. And that's all important, of course, the numbers and the data, it's all important. But it sort of takes it down to that kind of relationship and heart level. And I think that is where the magic happens. And so when I love, thinking about kind of that design thinking, and it's really sort of like stepping into sort of the user experience, to kind of use, it's like an IT word, to put yourself in the shoes of somebody who, is staying in a shelter and trying to navigate all the red tape and all the barriers and all the things that goes along with that. And, maybe they don't have a phone, so how are they going to, call their case manager, and just to ground yourself in that experience of what that is, and then to understand, how is the system working? How is it not working? And how can we be an influence to say it's not working, or maybe it is working, but like when things aren't working, to sort of raise that voice, and kind of stand behind folks as they're raising that. Yeah.
So here at Westminster, our theme for Advent is How Does a Weary World Rejoice? And Megan will be preaching about doing work and doing it joyfully. If you all cannot tell, Katie does her work joyfully. And so it is wonderful to be in this work with her and to have her as our director. And building on Sandy's question, would you say a little bit about what the SDOP grant would enable Street Voices to do? And let's make a plug for people getting involved from Westminster.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. So the work that the Self-Development of People grant is supporting is, essentially it's enhancing the ongoing work of Street Voices of Change. So it's enabling them to continue to hold their weekly meetings, continue to hold their leadership meetings monthly, and kind of dive deep into some of the topics that they are thinking about and working on. Some things that are percolating, that are rising up as like what they might be working on, organizing around, are things like ongoing issues with conditions in shelter, still trying to drive forward a standards for shelter across the state. That work is happening at the state level. Things like providing feedback and holding accountable the systems that are not necessarily working. And so, it's work that the group has already been doing for the past, they've been around since 2016. So it's some of the work that they've already been doing, but it's really helping to enhance that and really drive that forward. So it'll allow that work to kind of go deeper. Yeah. And then, yes, getting involved, and we're just wrapping up here. So to get involved, and I'll just there's some contact information back there at the table. Feel free to reach out to me directly. One of the ways that folks here at Westminster can be connected more deeply in our organization is working with our organizing team. So again, to be that conduit between the work of Align and the work here at Westminster. Of course, Elena does an amazing job of that already, but to support her in that. You can also, on our website, you can sign up to get advocacy action alerts. So, when the legislative session is happening, and we need calls to make sure that this bill gets passed, you can sign up for that. There's tons of ways to get involved in our campaign guide. And then my biggest thing is really, I feel like if you can be an ambassador as well out into your own community about, connecting with the issue of homelessness, humanizing the issue of homelessness, and helping your folks to understand kind of what's going on in the world and what people are experiencing. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Katie. Can we all give Katie a big hand, please? Thank you so much for coming and bringing us enough information to dive back in if we're so interested. So thank you so much. The social justice forums are going to be taking a short break over the Christmas and New Year's holidays and resume on Sunday, January 7th, when we're going to welcome Dr. Courtney Jordan Beckler from the Heart Institute Foundation, speaking on health disparities in our community. So we'll look forward to seeing you all then. Thank you so much.
Thank you.